I'm a senior education market specialist at Harvard's Education. And over the last 18 months or so, the education sector has seen some of its biggest challenges in decades, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So although the 2020-21 academic year probably saw a lot of trusts running in-year surpluses and growing their reserves, this year is a year like no other. Lingering after effects of the pandemic, recruitment and retention issues, soaring inflation, no end to the issues. Now, we recently surveyed trust and school leaders, and we'll be publishing these results shortly. We found that increased salary and energy costs are the biggest financial challenges that trust leaders are facing right now. So 35% of MAT leaders indicated that increased salary costs were having the biggest impact for them. And that's one of the things we'll discuss today. And in spite of the announcements about additional funding from the government, our leaders survey revealed the distinct lack of confidence that this input will be enough. 68% of our leaders were either not confident at all or not very confident that the funding increases that were announced in the autumn statement would mitigate the cost pressures that they face. So what we've done is we've brought together a panel of experts to help discuss these issues and importantly, strategic action that trust leaders could or should maybe, I suppose, prioritise at the moment. So I'm just going to run around the virtual room here and have everyone introduce themselves. So Becky, if I come to you first.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Becky Denby. I am currently Chief Financial Officer of InMat. We are a 12-location primary school MAT based in Northamptonshire.
Thank you, Becky. Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Welbeck, Director of Ginger Energy, and we're a specialist energy management and procurement company that has a large interest in the academy sector.
Super, thank you. And Claire?
Hi, yeah, my name's Claire Barber. I work for School Business Services. We provide support services for schools.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jeff.
Thanks, Tom. My name is Jeff Marshall. I run a company that converts schools to academy status. We've converted 285 schools. We support over 50 multi-academy trusts in ongoing areas such as due diligence, MAT transfers, mergers, etc. And my second company is a CPD training and coaching company, working predominantly in schools maintained and academy trusts. I was also a national leader of governance for 8 years as well. And I mentor chairs and train governance and review governance still.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeff. So we've got a bit of an outline for what we'd like to discuss today, but we're really happy to take any questions that pop up. And what I'll do is I'll monitor the Q&A. So there is a little section where you can drop in questions, and if those are particularly timely, I'll interject, or I may hold some back to the end. But please do stick any questions that you have in the chat, and I can put them to our panelists. So I suppose maybe if we start at the coalface, and if we go to Becky first, are you concerned by the current financial situation with your trust?
I think within reason, yes. We are lucky that we have some healthy reserves at the moment, but I think, as you referenced earlier, certainly this year with the immediacy of rising costs, energy prices, unfunded teacher pay rises, supply, there is only so long that those reserves will cover those ongoing costs if funding is not raised and met. It's certainly not proportionate, and I think the strain on some trusts and members of senior leadership to mitigate that is also a concern potentially from a mental health perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Claire, from a wider perspective, in terms of your client base, would they echo some of Becky's concerns there?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it does vary, as you say, it does vary depending on the trust. Some trusts are in a much better position with regards to surpluses, so that will see them through. There are other trusts that have relied on surpluses for the last sort of year or two, and really don't have enough surpluses to see them forward if they have another year the same as they've had in the last couple of years. So I think, good financial management is the key to getting them through it, being on top of it. Those that seem to be quite optimistic. Those that aren't are not so optimistic because they don't have a true handle on where they're at now. So I think that's the key thing. Those that have good financial management are not as worried, but they're all struggling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think on the financial management front, trust growth seems to be back on the agenda in terms of achieving economies of scale and making savings there. Our Iris Leaders survey suggested that 91% of those respondents to that plan to grow in the next 5 years. If you read the Creston Academy's benchmark report, they're suggesting that we're likely possibly seen a peak in the number of individual mats that we've got out there in the country at the moment. The number has fallen very slightly in the last couple of years. We know there's very high barriers to entry for newly formed mats, if you like, in terms of being able to rapidly scale up and achieve those economies of scale. So some are talking about us entering an era of consolidation and existing mats leading the way and growing. So I wonder, Jeff, playing on your experience here. So two things, I suppose. One, what's the implications of larger trusts, increasing trust size? But then also, I know we've chatted in the sort of pre-discussion to this that you've got some evidence about new mats, forming and that actually being counter to what we're hearing from the Creston report.
Yeah, it's a good point, Tom. And my worry is that we can't just keep talking about growing existing multi-academy trusts, especially when we don't have a national function in all of the regional directors' offices to actually conduct due diligence on those existing multi-academy trusts, and then have this one-size-fits-all that what we have to do is a mat is better than a SAT, a 10-school mat is better than a 9-school mat. And what we need to do is we've hit the optimum number of mats, so let's just grow them. What we're talking about here is rapid growth versus step change. And there are trusts out there who do grow properly, and there are trusts out there who don't grow properly. There are also trusts out there who effectively just want to be big system leaders, big players, etc. But as long as they're doing everything right, and as long as we're building the template around the schools, rather than fitting the schools into a one-size-fits-all template, that can't be right. My worry is we have a postcode lottery where we have regional directors saying, we don't want a new multi-academy trust in that area, but 20 minutes down the road, because we don't have a footprint, we'll allow 3 schools to create a brand new multi-academy trust. This becomes a postcode lottery at the whim of a civil servant. And my argument has always been, we have to fit the template around the schools rather than the school into a template. And if that means that we can build a multi-academy trust that is better than some of the existing trusts in the region, that group of schools should be allowed the permission and the freedoms to go and create something which is right for them and right for their localities. So I think we've got to have this discussion where we start moving away from, we've got enough multi-academy trusts, let's just grow them, and you don't have the ability to build anything that's better than we currently have. We've got to actually wake up here and actually say things can be built far better than some of the ones that are currently operating, when the regional directors don't have a due diligence function to see if they're still operating properly. Because then what you're doing is you're putting a school at risk by forcing them into an existing mat where you don't do due diligence. So we at least have to have it on the table as a discussion, Tom.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeff. And in terms of, as you say there, so just going back to your recent experience of, is it hard for groups of schools to form new mats? Is that barrier to entry real, in your opinion?
I don't think it is, Tom, because ultimately it comes down to people. If the people are right, then the outcome will be right. If the people are right and got the right mindset and the right skill set, and they seek external advice from companies such as Iris, from companies such as SBS, from companies such as myself, from existing multi-academy trusts, the more information you get, the better the decision-making, and better decision-making leads to better outcomes for children. So I think this is a perceived barrier to entry. I think the actual barrier to entry is the regional directors only wanting to deal with, say, 50 CEOs who cover 1,000 schools, as opposed to dealing with 350 CEOs covering 1,000 schools, because it's far more difficult for a regional director to get across all of those existing multi-academy trusts when there are a greater number. Now, this then becomes, Tom, a sector that's actually at the convenience of a regional director and the DFE, as opposed to the sector being at the convenience to the school and the trust. So I think there are no barriers. As long as you've got the right skill set and the right mindset and the right support around you, it's an easier transition in if you've got all of that together. And Tom, you've heard me say it, if you have the right people with the right mindset and the right skill set sat around the table making the right decisions for the right reasons, you end up making better decisions, and better decisions lead to better outcomes for children. We just need to ensure that schools and groups of schools have the right support, the right mindset and the skill set, as opposed to this perceived barrier, which in reality is a civil servant on a 5-year contract, who actually you get a different regional director coming in with a different perspective. I don't see how we can accept that, the fickleness of such a sector, such a scenario.
Okay, no, thank you, Jeff. And you mentioned there about seeking external help. I wonder if Chris, I could come over to you now. In terms of opportunities that the trusts have, you know, as the legal entity, you know, responsible, power to change things. Yeah, energy contracts is your bag. Do you want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. As trusts grow or are formed, they've got the ability to be the masters of their own destiny in terms of their utility contracts. So if we go right back to the start of a site joining an academy trust, they're going to have an incumbent situation in place with their utilities. Whether they keep that or not is at their discretion. So in times of the market, as they have been for the last year, if you have a contract that you wish to exit at the point at which you academise, you can do so. So you don't have to come with that baggage of a contract that was secured at the height of the market. There's a change of legal entity, and you've got legal protection around that in terms of what you can do with your contract. So as you change into an academy, if you want to keep it, if it's on good rates below where the market currently is, keep it. If you don't want to, don't. The choice is yours, but you have to manage it in the correct fashion. Alongside that, you've got all the other standard opportunities and risks that come with utility management for MATs and single site academies. But at the moment, everyone's focusing on the risks, and trust me, I understand why. I've been doing the maths. I've been providing budgetary numbers. I understand the pressures and the strains that are there. But with that comes a lot of opportunity, and there is huge opportunity across the academy sector to hemorrhage consumption and not use it in the first place. Generate your own, use less. But part of that has to be understanding your contractual arrangements and making sure you're free to do so. So you need to have a full understanding of your utilities. But there is no better time to start that process than when onboarding a new site into a MAT.
Okay, no, thanks for this great advice, and we'll pick up again on energy costs in a minute. Just before we leave the growth issue, Becky, if I could just come back to you for a second. Does your trust have had plans to grow? Is there anything holding you back, or are there reasons for or against that you've considered?
So we do have plans to grow. I think it may sound slightly dramatic, but in some respects, looking at it, we need to grow to survive. We've talked about some of the cost implications previously, but I think Preston Reeves also mentioned pupil numbers due to fall by 12% in the next 5-6 years, which will obviously have an impact on funding. So yes, we need to grow. Probably to some extent, we want to grow. However, for us personally, sort of tying in with what Jeff was saying and my background as a consultant, growth for the sake of growth isn't the way forward. Growth for the sake of posterity is definitely not necessarily beneficial. So we are sort of in a hold year at the moment where we're looking at financial control systems, processes, the right staffing, and making sure that we have the right infrastructure so that when we grow, it's scalable, but also it's focused on the right things. Making sure that the most money possible goes into actually the education provision rather than anything else, making sure we have the right people, making sure we do it right. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Perfect, thank you. Just interesting question that's come through, actually. I'm quite impressed with myself for keeping an eye on the questions at the same time. I don't usually do that. So Sarah, agreeing that, I think this is Jeff's point, that due diligence is absolutely vital, but it may result in schools that no one wants. Don't we have a moral duty to help those children too? And I wonder whether, Jeff, I could put that back to you at this particular point.
I think, Tom, this mindset, we've got to have this moral compass. It's all about children. It's not about empire building. It's not about staying on the board. It's not about talking about, if a merger is a merger or it's a takeover. We've got to park these things and actually have open and brutally honest conversations about what is right for our locality. COVID taught us that schools are far more than just places of teaching and learning. We became food banks. We became clothes banks. We became carers, we became social workers, and it just highlighted the fact that what we've got to do here is we have a moral obligation to do what's right for the children, not what's right for a civil servant, not what's right for a CEO, not what's right for a trust board, not what's right because you want the biggest trust in the locality. I think it all comes back, Tom, to growth. As long as it's right for all, as long as the trust is right for the school and the school is right for the trust, and you can create something bigger than the sum of the parts, that's when growth starts. And due diligence, for me, and you've heard me say this, due diligence isn't a one-off activity. Due diligence is a primary activity where you actually see if you can come together and you've got that moral compass and that ethos and that culture, and you can create something bigger than the sum of the parts. The next part of due diligence is the actual conversion process. And then the next part of the due diligence is the onboarding process. And the onboarding process goes on for years. It never ends. It's how you actually continue to have this moral compass. And the one thing that, Tommy, you've heard me say, and Becky's heard me say, is our job is to leave the place better than we found it. All operational staff and all strategic staff in any school, we are a transient band. And it's our job to leave the place better than we found it. And if we have to hang ideology on the door to make those decisions that's right for everybody, and then pick your ideology back up after we've done that, then so be it. And if you can't get to that stage, you shouldn't be in governance and you shouldn't be working in schools, because we've got to consider what's right for all the other people, not what's right for us.
And I think that's interesting as well from my point of view, because in terms of looking at growth and working with new schools and academies, for me the real red line is the ethos and the values. Due diligence, yes, absolutely. You need to look at potential hazards. There may be something that absolutely in your situation prevents you from working with a school, but the due diligence process shouldn't be there as they're not going to benefit us. It's to expose potential issues so that you can mitigate them. It shouldn't be something that completely prevents you working with. It's so you know exactly what you're handling. You can put plans in place to improve that facility or academy. And I think we need to consider that. And we also need to look at, quite often I've had it as a consultant in education, you have that, that's the way we do it. That's the way things are done. Or if we don't hit this rag rate, we don't. We need to, I think, sometimes be conscious more and more that we are essentially SMEs. And actually, we can think out the box. We can do innovative things. We can pay awards before Christmas instead of April, because that's going to benefit people. So I think this is also a time to potentially rethink how we approach things as well and be a bit more innovative in some situations.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I wonder whether this is wrapped up in sort of regulation and inspection as well. And I only say that because I was looking this morning at the new view of consolidating results across MATs on the DFE website. So looking at secondary outcomes and actually, yeah. What type of schools do you want to take on and affect your outcomes there? It all becomes very, very sensitive. But that's a discussion for another day. I have a couple of questions that have come in here, and then we'll move on to costs, or maybe a couple of points potentially. So Jill commenting that trusts that don't pass financial due diligence and maybe not picked up by another trust. Moral compass, great in theory. Oh, sorry, another one coming through. Moral compass, great in theory, but the risk is taking down the healthy trust, and whether the DFE might step up there and help fund acquisitions a bit more. Then we have a question around, loads of questions coming through now. See, this is where it will overwhelm me. The pause and the mantra of all in a MAT by 2030. What do you see happen with maintained schools moving to become part of a MAT if local authorities block that development? I wonder actually if anyone's got any thoughts on that. So I suppose this is both schools that perhaps don't necessarily want to academise, but also if they do, and as the point there was the intervention of local authorities. I don't know if anyone's got an opinion on that they want to share.
I think, Tom, in all honesty, because obviously my main company converts schools to academy status and supports multi-academy trusts, the 2030 deadline was always never going to be hit, solely because of the numbers. But we have just over 12,000 schools who are academies, and they were never going to hit the 2030. But the direction of travel, and the white paper was a policy position. The schools bill was pulled because it needed legislation. The white paper didn't need legislation. It's a policy position. So I think the three options that all schools had, all single academy trusts, all empty mats, all small mats had, option one was do nothing but have a plan B. Option two was go and join an existing bigger mat, but do your due diligence properly and know that you can create something bigger than some of the parts. And option three was always go and create your own, but choose your partners wisely and do your due diligence. Now, those three options are still there, but we do have ticking clocks on some of them. And then there are some things that we can't control, Tom. We can't control the constriction and the contraction of local authority SLAs and the quality of it and the support that you get from an authority. And schools are now converting predominantly because they don't want to be the last school standing. So it's fine pushing the boat, kicking the can down the road, or just pushing it down the road to make a decision. No worries, as long as you've actually considered all three options and you're doing what's right for your locality and your stakeholders now, and that decision is sustainable in years to come as well. I think the local authorities, they don't have the power to stop a conversion. There are only two entities that can convert a school to academy status. 9 times out of 10, that's the governing body, because that's the power that's vested in the GB and the Academies Act 2010. 1 time out of 10, it's Ofsted for putting that school into a category which forces the academisation. Local authorities can't stop that. And the second thing that was pulled by Gillian Keegan 3 weeks ago, on the top of the 2030, was local authorities being able to propose multi-academy trust. That's now gone. So in essence, local authorities can't create, they can't stop schools moving. So schools have to consider, will they be the last school standing? Is it right for them to do option one? Because they're doing everything right now and they can get what they need. The governance is good, the data is good, the finance is good, the SLAs are of a cost and a quality that works for them. They're giving their stakeholders everything they need to thrive. It's an understandable assumption then that such schools will actually say option one is right for us, but at least have the plan B. As more schools in your region, your locality convert, the greater the pressure on the authority, the greater the pressure on that maintained school. It's having an understanding of not just your situation, but not just the locality, but the region as well and the country as well, what the direction of travel is, because all of that information helps you make those decisions.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you for the clarification, especially on the technical issues there, Jeff. No, that was wonderful. We've got quite a few other comments that are coming through. I think what we might do with some of these is anonymise them and then maybe share some of the sentiments after the session by email, because there's lots of good comments coming through and alternative viewpoints. So thank you. Do keep those coming in, and we'll make sure that we collate them together. I wanted to move on to costs and a few sort of practical issues here. So energy and staffing costs were the biggest challenges that were identified in our survey, and I think is echoed by some of the sentiments so far. I think maybe, Becky, if I come to you, so your trust in particular, how have energy costs impacted your trust?
Yeah, substantially, to answer that question. So we, I think as everyone, we had that conversation of looking at fixed term contracts, but when was the best term to fix? That's gone up and down, and perhaps it wasn't the best time now, but it was at the time. We have entered into 2-year fixed term contracts in terms of electricity and gas, and we saved over the 3 years about £40,000 by doing so. However, electricity alone for this year, based on last year, the costs have doubled. So that saving is really, sort of negligible in long terms. So yes, it has had a significant impact. I suppose it's potentially also pushed forward the idea of looking at, renewable energy, the LEDs, that kind of thing. So it's possibly pushed forward that planning. So yeah, I think that's probably where we're at in terms of that at the moment. But still, and Chris will obviously be the person to talk about this. I do think sometimes understanding, being able to engage sometimes with the utility providers, knowing exactly when to fix, when not to fix, what is available to you, and having the transparency about what's available to you is not always the easiest.
So, yeah, perfect segue there. So, yeah, if we go to Chris, I suppose if you could possibly fill us in on any changes in sort of government support that are coming up, what trusts can do now and in the future to have an impact, how to engage with utility suppliers, things like that.
Okay, let's do the easy one first, shall we? The change to the support package that comes in on the 1st of April. So the support package over winter was relatively comprehensive. It took the edge off for many. It was never going to bring anyone down to parity of where they were. The idea was it brought it in alignment with domestic price caps. Now, there's a flaw in that from the off, that commercial power is normally cheaper than domestic. So bringing it down to that level was already disadvantaging. But the new relief scheme that comes in from the 1st of April is nothing more than a vanity project, essentially. The discount levels that have come down are to an incredibly low level. So the low level that you get after April is, if you qualify for it, is 1.96 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity. Now, bear in mind, the average under the previous scheme was 40-something pence. That's a significant reduction in the support, and the gas is 0.69 pence per kilowatt hour, and that's a maximum you can achieve. So to be eligible for it, you have to have signed a contract or traded your power, depending on the type of contract you're on, after the 1st of December 21. To put it in context, the threshold that they've set, no contract signed after Christmas would be eligible for it. So after Christmas 22, so as if you signed literally in that initial 12-month window, you will go on to a lower supported price for the next year. It's not going to touch the sides of the impact it's having on your bills. Apologies if you get some background noise. Our neighbours are currently drilling through the wall.
Drilling.
I've asked them to stop, but typically they're not. Apologies for that. So the new scheme is not going to make a large material difference to anyone's budget, which is where it picks up onto that next conversation of how do you have a large material benefit on your budget. And it is simply using less, which sounds very simple, I know, but it never is. You have your big ticket items like solar panels, LED lights, etc. They have a big impact. Solar doesn't make you any more efficient. It just means you're buying it cheaper. LED does make you more efficient. There's a lot of behavioural change, a lot of knowledge you can get from your building management systems, etc., to try and consume vastly lower amounts of energy. That is the only element at the moment that's going to have a material impact in the here and now. So if you've signed a contract last year that you have time left to run on, the only way of materially impacting it is to use less. And there's lots of ways, but the scary number that we always throw out there for everybody in a secondary school, and we've got data from 2,500 secondary schools that we apply this to. On average, a secondary school uses 60% of power when there's no child in it. That's where 60% of the spend is. If you understand your data and you get under the skin of it and understand what your energy estate looks like, you can start to make some fundamental changes to amend that and bring it down. That's the good news. The bad news is your contract that you signed with your supplier may not let you. You may have thresholds in there you have to honour. So the first thing we always say to everybody is to conduct a full review of your energy estate. And what we mean by your energy estate is everything from your plant to your maintenance to your contracts to, often across match, you have two people working to the same aim, but without knowing it, working against each other. You have someone in site saying, let's put solar panels on the roof, LED in the ceiling, and someone in procurement going to buy the power in the first place. And they both think they've done a fabulous job. And 6 months down the line, the person that's purchased it has bought far, far too much energy under their contract, and because they're not using it, they get fined by their supplier. So it's very important to have a full energy estate strategy and build it together. And with that, with all the relevant stakeholders in that process, you will end up with a strategy that will impact change more in the medium term than the immediate short term, but it will put you in a better place and you know where you're heading with it, and you'll see some real benefits. In the short term, turn it off, which I know sounds very simple and very, very easy, but there is a lot that can be done in the immediate term to cut power. And one of the things we always look at is how schools make revenue, lettings, and other. Make sure they're costed right, particularly in this energy crisis. We've done a little survey across about 100 schools that rent out football pitches. 97 of them are losing money every hour they rent the pitch out because they haven't adjusted their policy in line with the new energy bills for the massive floodlights that they're using. So when I say you go from the little to the large, you look across the entire estate. That's one of the things you can look at. It's a very, very small element of it. But if you start building that picture up, what you do will have a massive impact. And just bear in mind that number, 60% of power is consumed outside of core hours. And if you can change that, the 40% becomes mildly irrelevant.
Yeah. Wow.
So there's one last point you raised. I'll be honest, I've totally forgotten it. It was the energy scheme, you contact with suppliers, utilities providers.
Yeah, the relationship with them and using consultants potentially, etc.
Now, obviously, I'd always tell you to use a consultant.
Other consultants available.
But your route to market will vary hugely depending upon your trust, your appetite for risk, how big or how small you are, how far down that net zero journey you are, an energy efficiency journey. Your needs will change greatly depending upon all of those vectors. So there is never one right answer to procure energy. It has to be about what's right for your trust. And for some trusts, signing a document to give it to a PBO and say, off you pop, go and manage it for me, is the right approach. Others need to be much more under the skin of it and manage it, be involved in that management. There's a process to follow to identify that, and essentially it's understand your estate and what your risks are and your needs are to do that. But once you're there, your supplier is normally one step removed from you. It's not, if you go through a framework or you go through a consultant, normally there's a body sat between you and your supplier. And the uncomfortable truth is the supplier recognises your consultant, your framework, your A&other as the more valuable party in that relationship. They want that's where their revenue sits. That's where their route to this market is. It's with us. It's not with you. And no one ever likes hearing it, but that's the sheer fact of it. So the simple reality is you shouldn't be speaking to the suppliers. You're employing someone to do that. So the question is your consultant acting correctly on your behalf and managing your portfolio correctly? You make it their concern and their problem. You'll have a service agreement with them that says you're undertaking this work for me. In that, make it their problem to manage the relationship with the supplier. That's what they're there for. They have better routes to it than you do, and it should resolve the issues a lot quicker. And it is relatively as simple as that. For example, I'll give a very basic example. We at most suppliers have a dedicated point of contact that is there to manage our portfolio. You will phone the general customer access number. Okay, that's the difference between the two. We're here to make your life easy and deal with it. So if you are using a consultant, if you're using a framework, if you're using any intermediary at all, engage them to do this for you. It's what they're there for. In terms of generically speaking to a supplier, they're awful. There isn't a good one or a bad one. They are just universally poor. Every year on any survey you can find, energy suppliers come out top for appalling customer service. I think the tax man has a better pickup rate on the phone than energy suppliers do. So don't engage with them. Don't waste your time. Use somebody who's there to do it for you. And if you're engaged with someone at the moment and they're not doing that for you, ask them the question, why not? because that's what we're here to do. That's what your consultants are. So in terms of engaging, your consultant should sit as that bridge between you and the supplier. They should sit on the one side, making sure that they've picked the right supplier in the first place, that your procurement activity, your risk management is as it needs to be, and that supplier is the right choice. On the other side, once that is live, once they've got that contract in place and it's working, they should be there for the day-to-day management of it. And it's a different question to if your consultant or your framework isn't responsive to you than it is if it's the supplier. But you shouldn't be engaging with suppliers. You pay someone else. Whether it's overt or not overt in your agreement, you're paying somebody else to do that for you, so use them.
Perfect. Okay, Leonard, wonderful advice there. Thank you for that. Want to just move on to staffing and staffing costs. Obviously, there were the unfunded pay increases for teachers that were announced over the summer, which was wonderful, and then having to reforecast after that. I'm sure Becky, you loved that. But we also have so we had a question in about the National Joint Council proposal. The £1,925 currently on the table, the least we can expect for now for support staff, and how we can plan to mitigate against that. I'm going to bundle all of that up in a question maybe to Claire, which is about being prepared for the impact of changes to budget and how we can plan for that better.
When you're looking at your staffing and you're planning your budget for the year, it's really important that you get your timetabling for your staffing correct, things like that. Using maybe the integrated curriculum and financial planning tool, that will help you make sure that you're fully utilising your staff. You've got the curriculum that you want, because it's very difficult these days. Most schools, I think, they'd like to drive their curriculum and the finance comes after, but it never seems to be that way. Everything seems to be driven by finances. So the main thing for me is with staffing is to keep forecasting, keep updating, keep budgeting correctly. It's if you're not on top of it, it can run away with you so quickly, because staffing takes up so much of the budget. Being prepared is just it's budgeting correctly, reforecasting, letting your governors know, letting your heads know where you're at. It's just keeping on top of it, because and making sure that you're making the best use of the staff that you have, both teachers, support staff. It's making sure you use them to the full. I think that's really, in a nutshell, where I think schools can go. That's the way to go, but schools can go wrong because they don't keep on top of it. Yeah. Looking at your actual payroll compared to your budget, looking at the variances, are they sustainable? Are they constant? Is it a one-off? So I think that's how schools. I don't think you can ever really necessarily be 100% prepared, but you can be most of the way there with good budgeting.
Okay, and you touched on there, obviously. I don't know whether. No, sorry, I thought someone was going to come in. You touched on there, obviously, staffing. Our survey results, and I know there's a lot of talk of this in the sector as well. Obviously, recruitment and retention issues. We had a lot of murmuring about support staff and support staff leaving, particularly to work in the likes of retail, but also recruitment for leadership positions. And one mention was in MAT Central teams, for instance, getting finance professionals in. This is a very broad question, because it's for MAT Central teams, but also for individual school staff. And I suppose to anyone on the panel, how do we make these positions more attractive? How do we retain? How do we recruit, and how do we retain better?
I think I've got a few points potentially around the staffing. So just to echo again what Claire was saying, the budgeting, the reforecasting is absolutely key with how frequent things keep changing around staffing. But I think also being aware that you have the right tools in place, having the correct budgeting software, something that is MAT-led. If you've got potential error, especially with staffing, that impact can lead to some massive errors. We're also looking at, so I think everyone's more or less in a similar boat at the moment in terms of staffing being an issue, and therefore so is supply. So it's how do we manage supply? We looked at, or I looked at our figures for last year. Happy to share, we spent £370,000 in supply last year. It's only looking to be more currently this year. £92,000 of that was agency fees, which is extortionate. So one of my key things for the remainder of this term is to look at how we handle supply, and actually we're looking at bringing it in-house. It sort of, we can do all of that admin that the supply agencies do, but far quicker via text, via the right system. We can eliminate those agency fees. We can make sure that we have a bank of staff that we, we've vetted, we've used before, but also what we can do is then include our current staff who may be part-time but open to, additional hours, overtime, CPD, working in other schools. So it may also be something that is appealing to our existing staff, giving them more opportunity, more exposure, potentially more finance. So I think, again, it's, if staff costs continue rising, there is only so much you can do. So I think, again, it's perhaps looking at it from a different viewpoint. How can we handle it? How can we manage it differently?
Yeah, you're certainly taking control of that at a MAT level, especially if you're talking about sort of talent pooling for supply and the likes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on the sort of central staff or senior leadership side of things, probably not alone. I think most multi-academy trusts, actually, when you look at your central function, it's in a deficit. So I think for us, we need to make sure that we have the absolute right people in place. We have the expertise, but a big part of that for us, and I know we're going slightly off topic, is managing the funding, how we do that, and we're certainly looking at gag pooling. Top slices, recharges, those kind of things, build up, the admin around them, the time to do all of that, all has an impact. And actually, I don't think that people truly know the value of their central function, and I don't think it's accurately measured through a 5% top slice. So I think it's considering how that's funded, having the right people in place, and perhaps flipping the view on how it's funded.
Yeah. No. Okay. No. Thank you.
Sorry, Tom. Sorry, Tom. One of the questions you asked those: how do we retain staff, and certainly like central staff. I'm supporting a multi-academy trust where the CEO has now stepped down after 18 months. And it wasn't money. It was, and this is going to sound black and white, and there is no such thing as black and white in life. There are grey areas. So forgive me for what I'm about to say here. But one of the issues for that lady was lip service that was paid by the trustees about asking her if she was fine. And as most people do in this country and most people do in this life, yes, I'm fine. So therefore, she's fine. And what they did was then the strategic entity then leaves because we're transient. And it wasn't about particularly the remuneration package. It was more about understanding what support she needed and where she was and what was going on in her life and how could we support that. And that wasn't just the things that my trust does, which is well-being days or shopping days at Christmas or out the door by 4 days, etc. It's all of these things we can do. It's the little things. It's the accumulation of the little things, and it's doing more than just asking, "Are you okay?" and someone saying, "Yes, I'm okay." What we do is we've got to actually upskill our strategic entity to not just ask the question but follow it through. And usually our trust leaders, we usually put the emphasis on our trust leader, our CEO, for the well-being of everyone else. And then that lonely position of that trust leader is, for me, it's the responsibility of the trustees. For me, it's the responsibility of the chair, and I'm the chair of an academy trust. So my trust leader, her well-being, her happiness is my responsibility. So when I take responsibility, I become accountable. And accountability makes me step up to the plate. So it isn't just about saying, what money do you need to retain you? It's everything that goes with it. it's a package of support, how we retain staff, and it's engaging, and it's not just listening, it's engaging. There's a difference between communication and engagement, Tom. And engagement is far more in depth, and it's far more creating that relationship than communication is. I can communicate with any staff member, are you okay? Yes, I'm fine, Jeff. And I walk away, think I've done my job. But when you truly engage, you truly understand what someone needs. And if that's one person, then it's going to be the next person and the next person. So this is why I keep talking about joining up. We've got to join up all entities across a multi-academy trust and understand how everyone is operating and what they need to thrive themselves, because it filters down. If you've got a trust leader or a central team who are so under the cosh, and it's not just money, it could be money. How do we actually solve that? Becky's quite right. You know, we look at gag pooling and we look at how to generate revenue, how to reduce costs. We can do all of that, but it takes all of us to actually come around the table and actually have that discussion, not just one or two people.
I think that's a fantastic point about the CEO and it filtering down. I really do. And I think everything that you said there is across the board too. So, you know, in answer to, say, the retaining support staff, the principles you just talked about there, more than applicable, aren't they? No, that's really great. Thank you. One question to the panel that's come in, I think, before we leave this, and maybe we talk about income. What is the panel? I can say that, putting you. I don't need to answer this. Budgeting for teacher pay increases for next year. So I suppose maybe this is coming possibly to Becky and maybe Claire in terms of you know, what their expertise is. But Jeff, if you have a perspective as well, more than happy to hear it. So yeah, over to you guys.
I'm not. I think I'll be honest with you. In terms of budgeting at the moment, we have worked on a 5%, but actually we've not fully started working on our assumptions, because I more than envisage that they are going to change in the next month or so. So we've not put anything hard and fast in yet.
Okay.
Again, working on last year, we'd budgeted, and after budgets had been submitted to the SFA, everything changed. So yeah, I'm still sort of waiting on that. Claire's probably got a little bit more exposure to different trusts at the moment and what that might look like.
Yeah, I was hoping. She's just dipped out. I think she was having some connectivity issues, so hopefully she'll come back in a bit and we might be able to get some thoughts on that. I don't know if, Jeff, if you've got a feeling from trusts that you've worked with.
Yeah, we've got trusts, Tom, who are planning for a zero because they're just not at that stage of having enough information to do it. I've got trusts that they're actually overestimating that increase at 10%. Because what they're saying is, if we and I understand this, because in my school we've done this for 30 years, we underestimate income and we overestimate expenditure. And what we do is, we in our management information stats on a monthly basis, we start then really drilling down in month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, and we tend to get to the stage where we know we're going to end up with a surplus solely because of the next point that you're going to raise, which is the income side of it. So I've got a massive discrepancy of trusts going from 0 up to 10% at worst case scenario, and what does it look like? And even them planning, is there a restructure that's involved? Because if we plan for the worst case scenario, and rather than hoping for the best case scenario, then what we can do is we can work backwards from the dark days and actually get to a situation where actually we do have smiles on our faces at the end of the year. So there is a huge discrepancy going on in the trust that we're supporting, Tom.
Yeah. No, okay. No, thank you for that. And yeah, and let's move on to income, because I'm conscious of the time slightly. You know, with income sort of clearly lagging behind inflation, one thing I suppose trusts can do is look towards supplementing their income. You know, so what sort of things can we do to generate income? I suppose talking about, you know, lettings and rentals, etc. I should probably put that to someone, shouldn't I? Maybe if we start with Becky, you know, are there other things that your trust does in particular that work well?
Yeah, so we have wraparound care at the moment. As I said, we're primary mat, so nurseries, things that will hopefully, you know, help to feed numbers through to the primary schools is obviously a big thing for us. Catering is not currently in-house. We do have uniform sales. I think I'll be honest with you, in terms of the trust, the income generation has probably not been something that's been as big a focus as it might have been historically. So it's something we're working on. Our priority at the moment is actually what you were just referencing, looking at staffing structures as our base point. But even down to things like we bank with Lloyds, making people aware that they do the fundraising matching, all those kind of little things, trying to look at potential events, which again might generate income, but also promote the schools. You know, we need those, the bottom line when it comes to income really in terms of how you get it is pupil numbers. So we're trying to do as much as we can to promote the schools. And then we do need to look at some more ways of generating income.
Okay, lovely. And then Jeff, in your the schools that you work with, any particular gems there in terms of income generation? I know we talked before about your school that you are the trust that you were a trustee of, and generating income in nursery wraparound.
Yeah, so I've been a governor for 30 years at the same primary school, One Form Entry, and we are One Form Entry. We have 211 in the main school. What we do is we generate over £340,000 in nursery wraparound care and extended services in a One Form Entry primary school, because what we do is we engage with our parents and ask them what they need. So we're open 50 weeks of the year, and if a parent wants us to look after their child for 17 minutes, they pay us for 17 minutes. And what we do in that is that money goes back into children, to teaching and learning and resources and staff to actually join up. So we also then generate over £15,000 a year in letting. So we have a dance company that comes in 5 nights a week and all day Saturday. We actually make a few £1,000s a year out of renting the school out for parties. We had a wedding 2-3 years ago, and we rented out the school for the wedding because it was 2 ex-pupils who wanted to marry in a primary school where they first met as children, as 3 or 4, 5-year-olds. So what we do is we also have an enterprise club where we actually have 6 businesses run by the year 5s and the year 6s, and we give them money at the start of the year. They run the businesses and they make profit, and the profit goes back into the school. And we're selling produce that we create to the local Waitrose. We're selling stationery to the local stationer. We're actually selling advertising space because we make films. Our children make films, and we sell advertising space before and after the end of the film to banks, because this is how children learn. But we generate about £12,000-13,000 a year out of the enterprise club profit. That profit goes back into what the children want. So the children have their own school development plan. I'm saying what they want the school to look like. The children have their own SLT, and the SLT meets with our SLT, and the children's SLT present their SDP to the governors, to the trustees, about how they want their school to look, and they can fund certain things from it. So all of this, Tom, if we can do it in a One Form Entry, that every multi-academy trust listening to this can do it far better than us. I'm certain with the skill sets that are out there on this call. If we can do it, if we can generate over £360,000 in a One Form Entry primary school to supplement any cost losses, and it supplements the gag that we get, if we can do it, everyone can do it, because there's so much skill and acumen out there in schools and multi-academy trusts. We just need to start having conversations and joining up.
I think the other thing as well to consider that, forgive me, it escaped my brain, is if you are in a position where you have got those specific experts in place, obviously consultancy. We certainly have here. We have people that go out and do Ofsted reports. I offer some consultancy as well. So if you've got those expertise in-house, use them. It works both ways. You go out and offer your expertise, but you also learn fantastic things that another trust or another school is doing. And I think at the moment, certainly as well, whilst we've got issues around inflation on the one side of things in terms of expenditure, utilise that where you can to your benefit. So investments, there's some wonderful investment platforms out there at the moment. If you've got the available cash flow, you know, those returns we're looking at sort of next year about £25,000, which is not based on the biggest investment. Obviously, we're being risk aware, but I think that's something to consider at the moment as well in terms of income generation, if possible.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, and I see that Claire's popped back, which is lovely. We've only got 5 minutes. I did want to ask a quick question about governance before we sort of wrap up. And Chris, I think
can I just very quickly jump on that last point for one revenue stream?
Fine.
One that we're seeing a lot of academies do at the moment, if they're in the right place, you've got to be geographically a need for this. But it's just, if they're installing electrical vehicle charging points, making them publicly available. And that can be as simple as putting a fence across the charger, so one side's on a secure car park and the other side's on public access. But the charging points that schools are using, they are making a substantial sum of cash compared to the cost outlay for infrastructure they're already putting in by making their charging points publicly available. Particularly if you've got a gym or another that's used for lettings of an evening, letting those people charge electrical cars while they're there can be a very good revenue stream, particularly if you're already paying for the infrastructure anyway. So you can use that as a revenue source. But there is a couple of schools in city centres that are turning £15,000 a year per charger.
Right.
If you think city centre parking's limited, EVs are limited, you provide both, then you've got a revenue stream there for it. And ironically, very, very rural as well, because there's not very many chargers around, so people use them. But it's just another element to think of. If you're paying for infrastructure, can you use it in a different way?
That's a great interjection. I think anything that's going to help people, you know, the immediate instance, fantastic. One really quick one from you then, Chris, to just give you sort of 30 seconds on this, because I know it came up pre-discussion. So this is with stakeholder management, with trustees, and having, you know, governors and trustees involved in sign-off. Who are involved in sign-off on contracts, engage in initial discussions. Could you just give us sort of 30 seconds on that?
Yeah. If you need to be there from day one, because never highlighted more than in the last year, prices are valid while the market allows prices to be valid in a very regular situation. Sometimes it's not true, but the vast majority of contracts are market linked. So if the market moves, they're not valid. And we have seen many trusts go to the person who's putting pen on paper, and the first time they've been involved in that process is when they're asked to spend millions and millions of pounds. And they query it, and they challenge it, and they ask questions, as they should. But they are questions that could have been dealt with 3-4 months ago. And last year, there was a very large financial impact for some trusts that got a little bit out of jail because of the government support. But we're talking millions of pounds increases because the market was moving so fast. So get stakeholders that are key to the process engaged from day one. You'll get a better procurement outcome, and you reduce the risk of delays.
Wonderful, thank you. And unfortunately, we have reached sort of the end on this one, but I wanted to leave with a sort of one top tip from everyone, really, in terms of managing these tough financial times. So maybe if because she's come back to us, Claire, if I could come to you first, if that's all right.
My top tip would be make sure your budget process is robust, and make yourself aware of funding changes. And any known future cost increases. So that's my top tip.
Perfect. Thank you. And Becky?
I think it would be, I should go with the financial controls, being CFO, but I am going to say make sure, I think at the moment it's a lot about the people. Make sure you've got the right people in place, the right team, and don't think because you work in education, you can't think outside the box.
Wonderful. Jeff?
I think, Tom, for me, it's get the best external support you can, because the best external support you can get will actually upskill you, and upskilling is going to be massively key moving forward in education. The better the skills, the better the decisions, better outcomes as well. So external support leading to upskilling.
Wonderful. And finally, Chris?
Build a strategy that involves any stakeholder that is relevant to it. Don't go off down one-way road because that's how you've always done it. Bring in the people that inside your own organisation that have touch points involved in it that you haven't previously considered.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, I think by virtue of only getting through about a third of the content that I had planned in front of me here, we could have carried on for hours there. I hope those watching found that useful, and please do feel free to contact us if you'd like to discuss any of those themes that have come up in discussion today and how we can help further. As I said, with the questions that we were unable to answer, we'll try to anonymise those and stick a summary in the email message out to you after. But thank you very much to everyone for being on the panel today. Wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.